So about 2 months ago, I made these videos. I did it because I was trying to articulate my concerns. Now, what happened as a consequence of making these videos was really quite unexpected to me. There's been 140 print articles published about this, whatever this is, in the last 2 months, and then dozens and dozens of YouTube videos and television interviews and radio interviews and demonstrations. Millions of people have been tuning into this online. And so obviously something's up, and I can tell you that what's up isn't only a discussion about Bill C-16 and about gendered pronouns. You know, sometimes when you're having a debate or a discussion with someone that you love and you're having a little argument about something, like who's going to do the dishes or something like that, or especially if you haven't been getting along very well with that person, you know how the discussion starts with something specific and then you start trading all the things that it might be about until you're arguing about, you know, the way that you behaved on your third date, you know, 10 years ago, and the whole underlying unresolved chaos of your relationship emerges through the little portal that was defined by the argument. You know, well, that's what this is about. So what the hell's going on here exactly, and why are we damn near at each other's throats? Look at what happened in the United States a week and a half ago. There's some things to talk about here, and I started to try to talk about them, and I would say that my freedom to do so was rapidly infringed upon. My career was put at risk, and I find this absolutely unacceptable because I am trying to sort this out. And so we need to start talking and listening. And when you talk, it doesn't mean you're right, it doesn't mean you're correct, right? It means you're trying to articulate and formulate your thoughts like the boneheaded moron that you are. And you're going to stumble around idiotically because what the hell do you know? You're full of biases and you're ignorant and you can't speak very well and you're over emotional, and you know, you've got just problems that you can hardly even imagine that are interfering with your ability to state something clear. And so what you do is you do your best to say what you mean, and then you listen to other people tell you why you're a blithering idiot, and hopefully you can correct yourself to some degree as a consequence of listening to them. And you see, that's what free speech is about. It isn't just that people can organize themselves and their societies by thinking. You can't do that because there's only one of you. What you have to do is you have to articulate your thoughts in a public forum so that other people can attack you, and hopefully in a corrective manner. And then you want to, you know, step back a little bit and think, okay, well, you know, I was a little arrogant there and I was a little over emotional there and I didn't get that quite right, and maybe I'm outright biased on that front. And you want to correct what you say, because then you correct how you are, and then you correct how you act in life, and then you correct your society. And to the degree that we limit freedom of expression, we put all of that at risk. And that's partly why I don't believe that freedom of speech is just another value. I think that's preposterous. I think that if you claim that, then you know nothing about Western civilization and history. Freedom of speech is not just another principle. It's the mechanism by which we keep our psyches and our societies organized, and we have to be unbelievably careful about infringing upon that, because we're infringing upon the process by which we keep chaos and order balanced. Well, what is this all about? I can list you some of the things that it's about. It's about inclusion versus bigotry and prejudice, right? It's about the left wing versus the right wing. It's about who's free to choose their language, and what elements of respect that you're due to people who are different than you, say with regards to pronoun use or chosen names. It's about whether the subjective or the objective is going to take precedence, because implicit in Bill C-16, and I'm telling you, there's an assault on the idea of objectivity itself, an assault on the idea of biology itself. And if the university thinks that the sciences are going to be immune from the ideological doctrine that's embedded in these pieces of legislation, they better think again, because there is trouble coming. I know that OISE already has an anti-psychiatry program, and we noticed that Ken Zucker got hounded out of his job just a few years ago, even though he was an entirely credible scientist and clinician. It's about constructionism, social constructionism, versus positivism, versus pragmatism. And there's a mother versus father thing going on here too. And you know, you kind of saw that with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. I would say that was the overprotective, devouring mother versus the tyrannical father, which is not a good, that's not a good narrative from a mythological perspective. It's about also the adversarial spirit, I would say, versus the logos. And the adversarial spirit is the spirit that claims what I think right now is correct above all else, and I have nothing whatsoever to learn, versus the logos. And the logos is a very complex idea, and that's that the proper citizen is the person who embodies truth in speech and attempts to act it out. And that also includes listening, because listening is part of communicative intent. And I think at the moment that we're embroiled in a war on every single one of those dimensions, and several others that I haven't had time to list. And the evidence that we're in that sort of war is precisely the fact that this has attracted so much attention. I mean, I just sat in my bloody office at home and threw up a couple of amateurish videos, more or less attempting to articulate my feelings about a couple of policies, and it's like all hell broke loose. And why? Well, because that hell is right underneath the surface.
I hate to stop there, but you're at the end of your time.
I'm done.
There have been some profound misunderstandings circulating about the law, and I'm here today as a lawyer, as a law professor, as a civil libertarian, as an expert in equality rights and freedom of expression to try to correct those misunderstandings. So let's start with Bill C-16, which passed third reading yesterday in the House. It's the proposed federal legislation that does three things. First, it adds gender identity and expression to the Canadian Human Rights Code. Ontario has had these since 2002. The federal government here is simply playing catch-up. There is absolutely nothing unprecedented in this. Number two, Bill C-16 adds gender identity and gender expression to provisions in the criminal code that define an identifiable group for the purposes of advocating genocide, the public incitement of hatred, and the willful promotion of hatred. The Supreme Court of Canada has said there's a very clear definition. The threshold is violence. In fact, there has to be personal violence. It is an extremely high threshold. The court has said over and over again, and I quote, it is, quote, the unusually strong and deep felt emotions of vilification and detestation. The court has said it is not disdain, it is not dislike, it is not offense. Plus, something that's often lost, hate speech criminal charges cannot be laid without the approval of the Attorney General. Third, Bill C-16 adds gender identity and expression to the provisions of the criminal code that deal with sentencing for hate crimes. So now, evidence of hatred on the basis of gender identity and expression could be taken into account. This has no impact on pronouns, unless, of course, an accused was misusing pronouns while assaulting, sexually assaulting, or murdering someone. Now let's look at the Ontario Human Rights Code. It's not constitutional law, which limits government action. It's not criminal law, where the state prosecutes individuals and sends them to jail. It's a type of civil law where private individuals can sue one another. And the remedy is generally damages. Since 2012, the Ontario Human Rights Code has prohibited discrimination and harassment on the basis of gender identity and expression. It prevents discrimination and harassment against trans and gender non-binary individuals in employment, housing, and services. So what does this require in relation to pronouns? According to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's policy, section 7.4, it specifically said that refusing to refer to a person by their self-identified name or proper pronoun could constitute gender-based harassment. Refusing to refer to a trans person by their chosen name and a personal pronoun that matches their gender identity or purposely misgendering will likely be discrimination when it takes place in a social arena covered by the code, including employment, housing, services like education. What about gender-neutral pronouns? Well, the Commission has said the Ontario Human Rights Code does not require any particular gender-neutral pronoun. If in doubt, ask the person how they wish to be addressed. Use they if you don't know, or simply use their chosen name. Is this the first time that a law has decided what we must say as opposed to what we cannot say? No, not at all, not even close. It's not uncommon for the law to require expression. Bilingual labeling requirements on food packaging, health warnings on cigarette packages, the oath of allegiance to the Queen that must be sworn at citizenship ceremonies. Does the requirement to not misgender the pronouns violate freedom of expression under Section 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Probably it does. The Supreme Court of Canada says any restriction on speech is a prima facie violation of Section 2B. There's this whole other section in the Charter called Section 1, which says that all rights and freedoms are subject to reasonable limits as are demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. why it all matters is because people matter. And I worry that we've moved into a place now, a kind of not only a post-truth politics, but a kind of post-empathy politics. How bloody hard is it to simply treat these people with respect and dignity? Because all this is about, all human rights are about, is respect and dignity. And if you could throw in a little kindness on the top, that would be even better.
So I'm going to read you something that a graduate student sent me from the University of Toronto the other day, and I can also tell you that I've received hundreds of letters like this. Today, I had a tutorial at the University of Toronto where I talked about Jordan Peterson and issues of personal identity, legally sanctioned identity categories, etc. I brought up a video of a tall white man in his 30s who asked students at a university how they'd react if he told them he identified as a woman, as black, as short, and as 5 years old. Spoiler alert. Students in the video resist some of the later categories a bit, but are mostly accepting. Still, students were not engaging in discussion. I asked them why. One said it was because she was worried to share her opinion for fear of being singled out or saying something offensive. I asked who else was not speaking for that reason. The whole class put their hands up. No participation. Why? They weren't uninterested. They were afraid to speak their minds. The PC police are in your heads. You just heard a lawyer's opinion. I have many lawyers' opinions, by the way. I'll start with lawyer one, who was the counsel to several prime ministers. He talked to me about the Human Rights Tribunal because I went and saw him 2 weeks after this all started. Human Rights Tribunal is a kangaroo court, in my opinion, and it should be abolished as fast as possible. It's one of the many institutions in Canada that pose a threat to your freedom that is of almost unimaginable proportions. Here's what this top lawyer told me. If I'm taken in front of the Human Rights Tribunal, it will cost me $250,000. I will pay the legal costs for my opponents, and I will lose. He said, go back to your safe little life and shut your mouth. Second lawyer told me, my critique of the Ontario Human Rights Commission is spot on. And absent the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which has these contradictions built into it that you just heard described, much of what I was saying was illegal and has been illegal since 2012. Lawyer 3 told me that if I breached a tribunal order, so imagine I was taken in front of the Human Rights Tribunal and I was fined and then I refused to pay the fine, which I've stated that I would do. That equals contempt of court, which inevitably means jail until the contempt is purged. The social justice tribunals and the SJWs, social justice warriors who staff them, have a rogue nature. They can search your house without a warrant. They can use secret hearings. There are no rules of evidence, and the judges are unaccountable. But those are legal opinions. Let's look at a real world case. Let's look at what happened when I made my videos. Let's look at how the university responded, because I can tell you, in the video I said, look, what I'm doing is probably illegal, and worse, my employer is legally responsible for it, because that's built into the codes as well. So by the way, if you're an employer, you're responsible for everything that your employees say, and everything that anybody interprets what they said as being, whether it's unintentional or intentional, whether or not a complaint has been made. So just think about that. Anyways, October 3rd, the university said, like all members of the university community, I have an obligation to comply with the law, including the provisions of the Ontario Human Rights Code. Their policy with regards to workplace harassment, which the university implied that I was engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct, where the course of comment or conduct is known, or ought reasonably be known, to be unwelcome. So what happened essentially was the university reviewed what I had done, and then they reviewed the policies as laid out on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website. The university reviewed my videos and they decided that what I said was true. They decided that the video I made was probably illegal and that they were responsible for it. And so in an attempt to distance themselves from me, under counsel from their legal people, and believe me, the university has good legal people, they sent me a warning. And this is what happens if you want to discipline a recalcitrant employee, essentially, so that you don't have to bear legal responsibility for their acts. And after the third warning, you can take further steps. Now, I pointed out to the university at one point, when we were discussing how this forum was going to proceed, that perhaps it